Welcome back to this sustainability session. I'd like to introduce to my left in the studio Ian Fitzpatrick, Deputy Chief Executive of Eastbourne and Lewes Councils. And joining us online, we've got Clare Crosley from Airscape and Ben Spode from Camden Council. We've got two very interesting projects which we hope will lead to some significant transfer of knowledge and also practical ideas. One in relation to the indoor environment, indoor built environment led by Ian, and one relating to outdoor air quality and some of the new knowledge that's emerging from a hyperlocal approach in Camden. So we'll kick off by actually having a session which looks at each project in turn before we perhaps draw out some of the lessons learned, but each are fantastic projects and have opportunities for scalability around your authority areas. So Ian, perhaps I can turn to you first to introduce your project and talk about what you've done, why you've done it, and what the sort of practical effects for you and the residents of Eastbourne and Lewes are.
Yes, good morning, Andrew, and thank you. So we started initially looking at how we would approach decarbonisation of our social housing stock. So Eastbourne and Lewes have got about 7,500 homes still in management. So we still own those properties, they're still managed and maintained by us. And about 18 months ago, we started looking to say, what could we do to look at decarbonisation initially? And what's quite crucial is that over the last 6 months particularly, we've been starting to think not only decarbonisation, but also heating and how we can actually reduce heating costs and how that can impact on things like air quality within the home, and also things like, as I say, the condition, condensation, mould, all of those things that are very sort of pertinent, particularly at the moment. So we started looking at the amount we were spending, and we looked across Sussex. So there's 15 authorities within Sussex, so East Sussex, West Sussex, and Brighton and Hove. And we looked at their budget sheets each year, and we looked at how much they were spending as stockholding authorities across that patch. So there was around about just under 40,000 homes.
Wow.
And we looked at the fact that each of us was spending annually around about 10 million-ish. So there's across the patch on those 7 authorities, there was just over £100 million being spent on repairs and maintenance.
Wow. Some
reactive, some planned. And at the time we looked at the 10-year as was horizon. So we looked at 2030 and we said, well, there's £1 billion spend in the system. That could we be smarter about that? Could we do things differently? Could we start to make a difference on embodied carbon, so the materials we're using, the methodologies? Could we do things to encourage more green skills? Could we look at the economy? How could we do things differently to start thinking about that? So we worked with a number of academic institutions, so Brighton University and Chester University, and we got some experts from the field of decarbonisation with us, so from the private sector, so AECOM, Robertson, via the Clear Sustainable Futures framework, but also people like Parity, Elementa, so the experts in that area to look at that. And we set them the task of looking, wrapping their academic experience and knowledge around our asset teams. And we said, let's look at the stock, let's see if there are archetypes that cover a proportion of our stock that we can start to analyse, do a deep analysis. So we've had humidity stats in there, we've looked at temperature stats, we've had external assessment of their thermal efficiency within the buildings. And we've been able to start to test different interventions, so heat pumps, solar panels, all of the things that we know is the green tech, to try and look at if you applied those to our housing stock, having analysed the properties we've got, what sort of outcomes do we get? Particularly around cost to the landlord, how it affects the tenant's fuel costs, and what it does in terms of carbon over a 30-year or a lifetime period.
Yep.
So we've done a lot of that analysis. And as I say, we've found that there are some really big gains to be looked at by understanding your stock in that detail, but also then working with supply chains, with FE colleges, to develop skills and the capacity within the system to look at a longer term plan So this isn't about a 1-year contract, stop-start. This is about saying, what can we do with that existing funding over a 5 to 10 year period if we have a more grown-up relationship with the private sector, with our colleagues across public sector? How can we put that money to better use?
Yep.
And we've got some really good outcomes now from that research that effectively lead us down the line of that we can do things differently and kickstart things in a different manner.
That's fantastic. So you've not started with, let's look for some grants for something. You started with, actually, we spend a load of money already. How can we better use that money? And you've got to the point where you kind of understand, I guess, the bang for the buck for different approaches.
Yeah, so this is a brutal pragmatism, really, Andrew, is how I would describe it, is that we know that, and we knew a year ago that money was going to be tight. Actually, we know, obviously we're waiting to see what happens in the next few days, but we know that there's not going to be a huge amount of money out there. But we have a lot of money in the system. If we can make that spend smarter and work with the private sector and government to look at how we can combine top-up funding in that relationship that councils have with their tenants, because again, our stock is around about 10% of our local housing stock, and how we can use that, the work that we do on a longer-term programme, looking at that more sort of grown-up approach, using the existing spend plus top-up to improve how those buildings that we currently own and manage operate and manage, and reduce things like, and really tune our programme to help certain outputs come about earlier. So for instance, at the moment, actually reducing fuel costs could have a massive benefit. So we might want to prioritise that in our programming, and for policymakers, actually having the understanding of how you do that is critical. So it's how we can do that to start to work. But yes, absolutely, this is about what can we do with our money better, and then look for assistance to top that up.
And so you've mentioned both decarbonisation on the one hand, but also effectively the kind of shopping basket in terms of energy poverty, I guess, on the other. Are those one and the same in terms of solutions, or are you seeing, are there choices to be made?
I think, as I say, what this analysis gives us is the ability to make those choices. So there are a whole range of factors in terms of cost. Certain technology is more expensive, and certain technology can actually increase the bills of our occupiers, our tenants. So if you go, to a certain extent, you can actually increase and have a cost that's more costly to the individual, but actually gives a better decarbonisation outcome.
Right.
Well, actually, in the first few years, I think actually as policymakers, we should be looking at actually reducing bills, because that will help enable heat to be within our homes, and that will reduce the prevalence of condensation and mould, or those sorts of things, and help the tenants that we've got now. Over the 3 to 5 year period or longer, we can introduce things. So there are certain elements that we've worked out through this analysis that are no regret spend. So solar PV, for instance, in none of the scenarios really, we've established that solar PV works on every scenario, assuming that you've got the right access to the radiance, the sunshine. But there are other ones that you would do perhaps later, as you sort of develop other things. So there's definitely a way of tailoring this. And decarbonisation and energy are different outcomes. And you might want to prioritise cost initially to residents in the next few years, particularly above and beyond carbon, but all of them add to that picture going on the long term.
So your initial approach almost has got a threefold benefit. It's sort of a healthy home, in terms of mould, etc. It's a reduction in energy costs. It's a reduction in energy bills, and it's a bit of decarbonisation as your platform on which you can then layer further decarbonisation further down the line.
Yeah. So this research absolutely started off with decarbonisation. Those two additional metrics that you talk about in terms of heating cost and healthy homes, I think have almost are now on a level with that initial sort of intent to get the decarbonisation. So really this is about how can we work together across the public sector on a longer term plan, use things like longer term procurement and delivery vehicles. Talk a little bit about Clear Sustainable Futures later, which we've developed to look at that 5 to 10 year period, and how we use the existing money smarter. And that's analysis, supply chain development, skills, and local economy.
Fantastic. So we'll leave that there for now. Just to introduce our colleagues from Camden and Airscape. You've got a different project, but actually equally practical in its application. So tell us a little bit about what you've been doing and why.
so I suppose what we've been working on is slightly different in that originally we were founded in 2014 by an atmospheric chemist, Professor Matthew Johnson from Copenhagen University, and he was really on a mission to make positive change. So obviously with his background, he knew the big problems we had ahead of us and then with air pollution. So he actually started looking at air filtration and city monitoring. So it's bizarre to me that it's still so little known about the subject. I mean, really, we have about 9 million people dying every year from poor air quality, and still it's, you know, people have no idea just how bad it is. It's linked to pretty much every kind of disease and health problem you can imagine. Like, the list is endless. So anyway, he was on a mission to really create that change. So he looked into air quality monitoring. And then we rebranded to Airscape, and we actually at that point started working with Camden Council. Obviously Ben's here today, and we looked at, okay, well, what impact can we have? And by looking at a dense air quality monitoring system, it enables you to have sort of real-time, real accurate street level data, so you can actually decide which way you may want to walk to school or to work, so you can avoid those real hotspots as such. I mean, there's been so many studies on this now, especially with children participating. I think there was a recent survey about 3,000 children from 59 cities, and they cited air pollution as the second worst thing in their city after traffic. Wow. So you can see this next generation of people coming through really, really care, and it is a real concern for them. So, I mean, even Alzheimer's and things like that, like things we're looking at today, like real life, real problems, even concentration in schools and cognitive performance, it really, really impacts. So anyway, it kind of then brought us onto, well, how do we kind of make this, or the invisible visible as such? So we worked with Ben and a few others at Camden Council, and we've actually deployed 228 sensors across Camden. So I think it's approximately every 200 metres is a sensor. So you can actually see this, it's visualised, and you can see kind of, there's I suppose a colour graph. You can see the sort of good air from blue down to the really dark reds where it's very hazardous. And it's interesting, you can visually see if there's something happening, like an event, if there's a fire or something in the city, you can actually see that across the map, and you can see this sort of dark red spanning across. And we had it recently with a plume of air that came over from an Icelandic volcano, and again you can just see that moving over with the wind across of Camden. So it's really interesting to see, and we're working with the Camden Clean Air Initiative as well, working with schools, like how, you know, they can learn from it, teach that in the curriculum, they can actually learn from it, pick their routes to school. But yeah, Ben's been absolutely fantastic. We wouldn't have been able to do it without Ben's support at all. Like, you know, with it, you know, you wouldn't even imagine some of the things we get up to. And, you know, we're sort of on these co-location sensors, climbing up ladders, like checking things are working properly. So, yeah, it's been a real blessing to have the collaboration between us. But Ben, I don't know if you want to mention anything about your involvement in the project.
I think, Ben, you might be muted. Not coming through for me. Is it coming through on the live stream?
Not muted.
Okay, you're not muted, Ben, but it's not coming through. Perhaps we'll continue whilst you're sort of sorting that out with yourself, Claire. I mean, you've mentioned once every 200 metres. That seems hyperdense. How does that compare to what would normally be the case?
Well, I mean, there's nothing else really like it at that sort of density at all. I mean, you've got sort of other people in the market doing it, but from a much larger scale. I can't actually tell you to hand what that difference is, but it's, you know, miles apart. And
Yep.
That's what makes this so unique, is you can actually look at it visually and see, okay, well, how can I take action? And actually, we recently introduced, we're just testing now, the route mappers, so you can say, okay, I want to walk from here or cycle from here to there, and it'll actually tell you the best route to choose, avoiding some of the sort of key pollution levels or areas. And sometimes, bizarrely, it doesn't act as you might think. So there's some obvious things in there. Okay, obviously, you know that's the main road. You know walking on one of the side roads is going to be better. But actually, sometimes you find those side roads are just as bad. It just depends on what's happening at that time.
Yeah, yeah. So it's not necessarily thrown up what you expected in all circumstances. So that proves the value of the density of the sensors. Yeah.
Exactly, and we're working with lots of different people and looking at pedestrianising certain areas, and you can actually see the difference. Like when you have the sensors on sort of pedestrianised streets versus non-pedestrianised streets, you can actually see there's a significant difference between the two. So it just shows you the importance of these sort of busy areas. Realistically, it's much nicer, not just because you don't have to worry about the cars and the traffic, but actually from a pollution level, it's at least 25% better air quality, and that's looking at a very small street that's pedestrianised, let alone if you had that across like a city centre. Ben,
let's see if you can, if we got you back in terms of voice. Are you there?
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yeah, great, perfect.
Yeah, sorry about that, the joys of remote working.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so good morning, everyone. I'll just quickly jump in from Clare, just to say that, last year at Camden Council, we made the commitment to achieve the new World Health Organization guidelines for air quality by 2034, which is quite an ambitious target, but it's been very useful so far in that it's allowed us to have greater clarity when it comes to setting our own aims and objectives and how we want to work towards improving air quality to reach this goal. So having this, this clarity with our work, it's really given us this drive to work and participate and partner with projects such as Airscape to deliver the Camden Sensor Network to our residents and to everyone who visits and learns in Camden, and hopefully to sort of the wider London community and beyond. So from a local authority perspective, our hope really was that by providing this sort of innovative project of hyper-local air quality data in a central London borough, it would serve to sort of further raise awareness of air pollution, the risk it poses to all of us on a daily basis, whether you suffer from pre-existing conditions or not. It all affects us on some level. So because of this, wanting this sort of drive to improve awareness and knowledge in our residents, it was really essential to sort of both up Camden and Airscape that this data be made publicly available for anyone to use, which it is. Any of you could go on now and look at how good or bad the air might be in Camden. So yeah, it really is just our hope that the public will engage with it. Hopefully, as I think Claire already said, we'll use it to make sort of simple, everyday changes that could really make a big difference to their lives, the health of their family, and hopefully also reduce their own emissions and make air quality a little better for all of us. So that's very much our hope for the project.
Tell us a little bit about the sensors you're using, what they're looking for, and maybe what the kind of investment is that you've had to have for, an individual sensor. How difficult has it been?
So I don't know, Ben, if you want me to jump in on that.
Yeah, sure.
So the sensors themselves, as standard, are looking at NO2, ozone, PM2.5, PM10. They have got other things in there as well that they're doing. I mean, they're low-cost sensors in terms of if you're comparing them to reference stations, which cost £200,000, but they're still a few £1,000s each. They're not yet really, really cheap to manufacture. It's just the scale of them and the technology that's within them. The biggest, I suppose, problem we have is actually how we deploy them, because at the moment they need electricity. So where do you site them? So we've utilised all the lighting columns within Camden itself, but so we've fronted this whole network at the moment. So it's cost us a significant amount of money, but it's been a really good pilot project because we can really start to understand sort of the behaviour of the air and really learn how people can take action. And we've been working with Great Ormond Street Hospital as well, and they've learned that actually one of their entrances is more polluted than another. So if they've got children there from respiratory problems, they can actually advise them, you're better off taking this route outside the hospital and walking to this station versus going out this way. So it's it's so insightful, but it is a significant investment, obviously, for us at this stage. But we're hoping with sponsorship from other businesses and obviously local sort of governments, we can actually deploy that further. But yeah, at the moment, it's cost us a real chunk of money to be able to deploy them. But a fantastic opportunity. But obviously, for us to deploy all of them, it's cost a lot.
Yeah, but you're kind of making the case for doing it clearly from the results that you've got. I mean, Camden is one of 32 London boroughs. What about the other London boroughs? Are you collaborating with them, or has this piqued their interest?
Yeah, I mean, we are speaking to a fair few of them, but unfortunately, a lot of it does come down to budget still. And, you know, I imagine in 5 years' time, this will just be a no-brainer. It's a bit like drinking dirty water now. Like, people will start to understand the value of having clean air and knowing what they're breathing. But now it's, you know, we're still fighting for that priority place, even though it's the biggest killer in the world, even though the World Health Organization have said it's the biggest environmental health risk. We are still really finding it hard to get that collaboration or funding and sponsorship. So it's not easy, but we are definitely talking to a lot of the boroughs. But again, like I say, a lot of it comes down to budget, unfortunately.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, as you say, I mean, it seems to be from what is relatively speaking benign, or that can be quite life-threatening around things like asthma and those sort of respiratory conditions, all the way through to the recent research that was linked to PM 2.5 to lung cancer in non-smokers. You know, so I mean, the evidence mounting up, you know, month by month, really about this, and presumably, even if you've not got the collaboration of the budgets yet, Ben, are you part of a network of air quality managers in London that you're sharing your results with them and encouraging them to take a similar route?
Yeah, absolutely. So all local authorities in London and sort of the Greater London area will be parts of a cluster group. So Camden, for example, are in the central cluster group. So we get together every 3 months so with boroughs like Westminster and Islington and City of London. And we do discuss all our ongoing projects, all the findings of them. Sort of, it's a very sort of interactive community when it comes to air quality. Public officers, we're always very open and very happy to sort of share our findings and discuss this. And there has been a lot of interest from our neighbouring boroughs in the Airscape project. And yeah, we can only encourage they reach out to Clare and Airscape to hopefully launch their own network.
Yeah. And is there opportunity for us to, sort of, in the same way that Ian's sort of talked about brigading our existing spend, are there ways in which we can leverage our spend as a sector to maybe reduce some of the costs, or are they at the floor and that's the minimum you're going to get them at? There's a sort of a de minimis price that you're going to have for a sensor, Claire?
I mean, if we had a big order, right, for the whole of London, I'm sure there's an economy of scale there, you know, to exploit it. But you know, unless we get a big order like that, especially as a smaller business, we just don't have the cash to be able to fund and to produce that volume. But yeah, like if we had a collaborative approach and everyone said, let's all clubs get together and let's do this, then absolutely, I'm sure we could get that cost down.
So maybe anybody from a city environment in the UK that's listening wants to join a club, then now's the time, I guess. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Excellent, thank you. Ian, if I can turn back to you, because you've sort of got to the stage you described where, you know, you've diagnosed the options, you've looked at the possibilities, you've got the same issue, which is, you know, as ever, it's money and budget, although you've got existing spend. How are you taking that collaboration forward, perhaps to allow you to leverage what you're doing as a group? And can others join what you're doing? You know, are there opportunities in terms of taking the results that you've got and joining you in what you're doing?
Yeah, so certainly we focused on the 7 authorities across Sussex initially, so the Greater Brighton area. And we've been working with those leaders because essentially with this whole programme, the key is actually there's just a small number of decision makers that can actually start to align themselves. And this is not necessarily about having one procurement or aligning all of our budgets. This is about actually having a programme that we work together on and align the programme and actually talk to businesses about certainty, really. So, when we talk to the supply chains, and we've done through Clear Sustainable Futures, we've done quite a lot of work talking to the supply chain. So people that are producing, the big manufacturers of the heat pumps, the ground source heat pumps, the PV, etc. And what they're saying is that, certainty is everything. And if they've got an ability to see something over a longer period, they're able to invest in things like skills. They're able to actually look at how they would look at even localized, manufacturing or assembly. Those sorts of things require a sense of certainty. having certainty around that. So really, the phase at the moment is that we've done the work with the Brighton University. We've got some really good outcomes that prove that there's an optimal way of delivering this that could actually act as a bit of a catalyst also to the private sector. Because the flip on from this is that if we can, as public sector, start to work in a way that businesses are able to get certainty so they can respond differently, that sets a standard for the private sector. The training that the operatives and the methods that they develop actually have a flip-on effect to the private sector. And again, we can also align these things so that if we're procuring, so councils often get a bad rep, but our public tend to trust us in these sorts of environments. And at the moment, the next 10 years, I think there's going to be a lot of people offering a lot of different things that may or may not work. And actually, this is about saying, can you use our reputation as being a trusted sort of partner to act as a route with the private sector to see this come to fruition, and we can get sort of some of those benefits. So certainty, I think, is a big thing. Longer term procurement. One thing we've done locally in the last 6 months is work with a smaller provider of solar PV, heat pumps, etc., which is a local SME for Eastbourne. We've worked with them. We've worked with the East Sussex College Group, and the council have provided a venue. So we've got a unit on one of our out-of-town shopping centres. We've now got tutors from the college working with the effectively the fitters and the operatives from our SME alongside the tutors. So you've got real life current experience of things like the solar PVs, the technologies that is out there at the moment. And we've now got courses where they're bringing in learners to actually train with those the private sector and the public sector tutors to actually come through to develop those green skills. Now, why we did that, to a certain extent, we were driven by Ohm Energy, who came to us and said, my order book has doubled. I can't actually fulfill these orders because I haven't got skills. So actually, it was actually driven, this skills initiative was driven by actually the private sector company coming to us saying, can you help us locally? Now, I think that's something that we've done on a local level. It is, you can look at, that's a very easy, replicable opportunity right across the country. We can start to do those sorts of things relatively easily. And again, ideally, from a local economic perspective, you've got that whole community wealth angle where you're using local contractors to hit this big transitional change that we've got. Energy production, green technology, solar PV, decarbonisation will be, even though we might have a bit of a tough time in the next few years, over the next 20 to 30 years, this is going to be, I think, a really big, significant part of our economy. So having that ability to act as local authorities, to anchor that locally, I think is really important.
And you mentioned in passing around some of the indoor issues like mould, etc. There's got to be a strong connection between the outdoor air quality and indoor air quality. Is there an element of that you're considering within the activity? So what's the connection between the two of you there?
I think it is worth saying that the tragic news that we've heard in the last few days is really shocking, and I think it's going to have ramifications and long-term ramifications for all sorts of areas, and we should sort of reflect on that, I think, as a sector and as local sort of public sector organisations. I think that what we know is that homes, if they're not ventilated and heated properly, that causes a higher prevalence of these factors. if people haven't got the money to do this, or the homes are wrong because they're not insulated, or we haven't got the right kit there. So this isn't about blame, this is just actually recognising that scientifically things happen with moisture, etc., and mould if certain circumstances occur. How do we deal with that? How do we monitor it? How do we ensure that we've got the right mechanical ventilation? How do we make sure we've got cheap available heat that isn't actually adding to the climate change? So I think it just demonstrates to me that this type of research that we've done, and I think the great work that we've just been talking about through Camden, I think the ability to monitor and understand things that happen outside and inside will just become so increasingly important for policymakers about where you put roads, how you put transport systems together, but also how we deploy investment for housing. So I think at every level, public health wise, this seems to be the monitoring is the key, because if you don't understand it, how do you plan and change?
And underlying implicit in that, there must be an education piece as well, because you talked about your suppliers coming to you, but you've got links, Ben and Clare, to schools. Actually, we're the awareness side of this about actually not just I need to do something, but actually what to do. Because just as individuals we can all act and we can all make change, but the first thing is knowing what to do. So is that part and parcel of the project?
Yeah, and as I say, we've taken a very in-depth, detailed view of the archetypes that we've got in the local housing. Now that doesn't cover everything, so in our area we haven't got any really high-rise blocks, so they're a different thing, but actually we've got lots of detached, semi-detached, terraces, four-story high blocks, etc. So we've taken those, we've tested that theory. Is there similarities? Can you start to apply almost an extrapolation across your housing stock that allows you to develop that long-term program? Because if you can get the long-term program, you can get certainty in how you deploy your funding. And we know that actually that there are going to be some challenges around funding, and that we'll need to continue to have that dialogue with private sector and government. But if we want our homes to be heated and we want them to be not a big carbon emitter, these sorts of big style programs there. And I think the public sector has got something that the private sector doesn't. In the private sector, you've got thousands and hundreds of thousands of individual clients that are making decisions. In the public sector, we've got, in our Sussex-wide example, only 7 controlling, £1 billion worth of spend in the next 10 years. So, so that's really the catalyst that we can do to work that forward.
Does that resonate with you, Ben, in terms of the education side as well as in terms of what you've done? It's fantastic. We can all see it. You can see it on the website. You can see what's happening, which is, as you say, great that you're exposing that knowledge to the world at large. But is there some dialogue, some communication at the local level with schools about the project and about what the impact of their decisions locally are?
Yes, absolutely. I completely agree. Knowledge is key. The more you can never have enough information. This is why projects like the Airscape is so useful. 200 plus sensors just in Camden gives us so much more information that hopefully people can use to improve their lives. So yeah, absolutely, knowledge is key. And yes, Camden Council as an organisation, schools is one of the areas we've identified in our latest air quality action plan as an area we need to target and try and sort of provide this knowledge to people at a young age so they're aware. And we've certainly had a lot of appetite for it. Young people do seem to be very engaged, particularly with climate and air quality issues, which is very encouraging to see. As with everything in the public sector, which I'm sure a lot of people listening will be able to understand, budget always is a problem. And so timing is also a problem. For example, there's only 3 of us in the air quality department at Camden. And so we don't have the physical time to go to every school. No. But we have launched a funding application for a schools engagement project, which hopefully we'll receive next year. And that will allow us the sort of time and money to go out and reach lots of the borough's young people and hopefully give them this fundamental understanding of air quality and the issues it poses to their health.
Yeah, excellent. And you're starting very firmly in the outdoor air environment and the changes there, and I'm sure there'll be more changes to come, both positive and negative, but are you also then looking at the connection to indoor air quality as a part of that?
Yeah, absolutely. We a couple of years ago, probably about 18 months ago, we provided a sort of leaflet which is available, information that's available online on indoor air quality and sort of how people again can sort of make small changes to really reduce that. And we're also part of a joint local authority project looking into the impact of wood burning, and so the PM 2.5 emissions that are caused through wood burning. And so that's a project that's very much in the middle. I haven't really got any findings that I can share with anyone yet, unfortunately. But indoor air quality, we're certainly very much aware of it, of how much of an issue it's become, and sort of the different sources of it, which maybe people aren't so aware of. You know, domestic wood burning in stoves, gas cooking, certain cleaning products, lots of everyday uses and products that people will use and won't necessarily realise the impact it has on their health. And you know, just as was mentioned previously, how key just simple ventilation is for improving indoor air quality. Yeah. So it's something we're very aware of. We've actually just launched this project in one of our wards in Somerstown near King's Cross, where we've started providing indoor air quality and personal exposure monitors to residents so they can monitor their own indoor air quality in their house or their flats.
So and so PM 2.5 and the like, is that sort of...
exactly, yes, PM 2.5. So hopefully they'll be able to see, you know, if they say they start frying some food on the stove, or if they've got a gas cooker, they'll hopefully be able to see in real time the impact that's having on the air in their flat. And then maybe, you know, if they open a window and they see it reduces, you know, that little bit of knowledge that they'll have gained there will hopefully be, and practical, will be very practical for them going forward.
Yes, and one of the features that we don't have the indoor air quality standards that you know, even that we'd have outside. You know, I know there's a new European grouping that's just emerged to start to create indoor air quality standards and to look at the research into that and research into schools. And unfortunately, one of the guests we couldn't have with us here today, it actually was originally a response to the tragedy of the Grenfell fire, but they've created IoT-enabled electrical sockets. Inside the electrical socket, it has sensors, including PM 2.5. Actually, the original purpose was that if the socket heated up, it released it off-gassed from the wires, so it would shut the socket off before it caught fire. So prevent indoor electrical fires. But actually, as a byproduct, they've created a whole series of sensors which will go throughout the building, which will enable you to sense indoor air quality, which I think is a fantastic achievement. And all the sockets talk to each other and give a map of the building. And for high-rise buildings, it's amazing. You can see a 3D visualization of how the air is changing within the building. So you know, I think there are lots of things that are coming along that will be a really positive in that regard. But that link indoor to outdoor, what we do, you know, is really important in terms of what we do inside the building. But actually, what's happening outside the building is coming in. So you can be opening the window and increasing the PM 2.5. If you take the data that you've got, you could be saying, well, actually, today I ought to be closing the window, you know, and maybe not using anything that's going to produce PM 2.5 internally, because for health reasons that could leave me exposed. So it's interesting that the education can lead to some really quite sophisticated decision making if you've got that knowledge. In terms of the sort of the approaches that you've got, what do you think your natural next steps are? You know, I mean, there seems to be a lot to ask given how much you've already done. But you know, in terms of for you, what would be, if you could wave a magic wand, what would be the next thing that you would be taking on with the project?
Is this to me? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, Ben. I should have.
Well, I mean,
or Claire. Yeah.
It's really just specific to Airscape. If we get as many people to use it as possible, it's quite intuitive. It's quite accessible because obviously most residents aren't going to have an in-depth knowledge of air quality or the issues it poses. But there's some useful information there. There's sort of FAQ type information on what this can do to you if you're exposed for too long, if you've got pre-existing conditions. And so there's a lot of useful information there that anyone should be able to understand. So I would, just from a local authority perspective, we'd love it if our residents would just really engage with it and sort of share it around amongst their sort of friends and families. And it's just, yeah, it's very much from our perspective an engagement tool to try and improve knowledge. So we need the people to engage with it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And yourself, Ian, you know, for you, what would your ask be? What was the next step for you if you could wave a magic wand?
Yeah, I think the theme really across both sort of projects is that actually some of this stuff's really complicated, and there's something about actually being able to, as local authorities, being able to reach for the experience and the experts in a way that allows you to almost not reinvent the wheel and start that whole process again, because some of this stuff is really quite sort of quite complex, quite difficult to sort of put together, and being able to find ways through people like yourselves and iESE, etc., to be able to almost access that information and stand on the shoulders of people like that Camden, etc., that have been done, and look at how we procure longer term, and have a dialogue. So we're continuing, as it'd be irresponsible for me not to think about the financial impact of some of these processes. We've got some really good evidence to show across housing how we can make a difference and do things differently. But we're going to need to engage with BAEs and others to really sort of start to see those benefits. So sharing it with government, sharing it with other local authorities, looking at procurement options, so things like Clear Sustainable Futures that looks at a longer relationship, partnership, and beyond that. I think that's, for me, is it's actually widening this information out. There's some brilliant work going on across the country.
Absolutely.
In these particular areas there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, certainly our experience early on, one of our earliest projects as a group of authorities was in schools construction, and we were able to bring cost overruns down to less than 1%, and we were able to start getting one school free for every 7 we built. And these were winning design awards. They weren't a carbon copy, Tesco store, move from place to place, and involving people in, that were going to use the building in their design, and pioneering what became the BREEAM standards and so on. So it is possible we believe that if we work together as a sector to deliver those environmental outcomes and those healthy environment outcomes, as well as reducing the cost. And I think if we can work in collaboration the way that you are with public and private sector, I think that's a great result. And as a starting point in terms of sharing, so we've got a special issue of our magazine Transform, which is free, and it's a means for the sector to share information. We've got articles on both of these projects coming out very shortly. So if you Google for iESE Transform, it's on the issue ISSW platform, free to download. It'll also be coming out within the municipal journals, it usually does. And there's a whole issue on sustainability in projects. So start there. If you would like to get involved in these projects, or you've got some ideas, we would be very interested in anybody that wants to help scale them up. Whether you are interested in taking an involvement in extending how the hyperlocal air quality sensing and the knowledge that creates, and the opportunities health-wise that creates, or whether you would like to engage with Ian and his colleagues about how you take some of their knowledge and apply that in your area, then please do come forward, because together, collectively, we are stronger as a sector than we are individually. So let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's share it and move forward together. So I think hopefully we've got a very, very good flavour, some very, very practical solutions, and that you've got some value from those. Up next, we've got a Transform talk about customer focus and congruence. That starts at 11:45. Will be live streamed onto the conference portal homepage. But for now, thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you again later. Thank you.
Thank you.